All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're super excited to talk with you all today. And thank you, Midwest Mountaineering, for hosting this. We always love coming to the expos. And so this is a great tradition. This one's virtual, but we look forward to be able to get together in person again soon. So I'm Dave Freeman.
I'm Amy Freeman.
And we're really excited to talk with you all today. We're going to share a short film called Bear Witness that documents the year that we spent in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And then we're going to open it up to questions. We'd love to answer as many questions as you have about the gear we used, what we ate, favorite parts about it, or maybe you just have questions about the Boundary Waters in general, planning a canoe trip or a winter trip. Maybe questions about the sulfide-ore copper mining that's being proposed near the wilderness. We look forward to answering all of your questions. So you can type those into the chat just right below the video screen. And we'll look forward to answering as many of them as we can after the presentation. And to start out, we want to start by showing you and telling you a little bit about what we did before we spent a year in the wilderness, sort of what led us to that point to actually paddle into the Boundary Waters and not cross a road or enter a building or flip a light switch for 366 days. Because I think a lot of people sort of wonder about that, how we prepared and also just sort of what skills we developed over time. So I think, Aiden, can you share the screen now so that they can see the screen?
All right, you guys are good. They can see the year in the wilderness video.
Okay, great. So 10 years ago, we're going to start 10 years ago. This was our wedding. And like most people, we took off on a honeymoon after we got married. But our honeymoon was a little bit different. We spent our honeymoon traveling by sea kayak and by canoe and by dog sled. And it was a rather long honeymoon. This was our route. We started on the Pacific Ocean near Seattle, and we sea kayaked up the Pacific coast, and then we canoed and dog sledded all the way back to Lake Superior, right through the Boundary Waters. And then the final year took us out the Great Lakes and down the East Coast to Key West, about 11,700 miles in the better part of 3 years. And you'll notice that right in the middle of this route, we paddled right through the Boundary Waters. After about 7,000 miles, we paddled home, and it helped us gain a new appreciation for the place we live in northeastern Minnesota and the Boundary Waters. And we realized that there's no place like it on Earth. And shortly after that expedition ended in April of 2013, we came back to Ely. And when we got back to town, folks told us about this mine that was being proposed. There was this copper mine, and this Chilean mining company wanted to build it just outside of Ely. And they said we should go to this place called Sustainable Ely that had just opened up on the main street. People were dropping off, furniture and painting the walls, and it was just starting. And so we went in there to learn about these proposed mines and just sort of try and understand what was going on. And here you can see the mine that the Chilean mining company wants to build, this mine called Twin Metals. And this is right here, right where the mine is being proposed, right on the edge of the wilderness area. And all the water from the mine site flows through White Iron Lake and Fall Lake and on into the wilderness area, and then along the U.S.-Canadian border through the Boundary Waters and the Quetico, and eventually into Voyageurs National Park. And the more we learned about this mine and this type of mining, because copper mining is very different than the iron ore mining that is common and has been happening for generations up here in northern Minnesota. This type of mine has a long track record of causing significant pollution. And the more we learned, the more concerned we became. And they had this canoe at Sustainable Ely, and it had signatures all over it. And we asked about the canoe, we signed the canoe, and we asked what they were gonna do with it. And they explained very proudly that they were gonna put it on top of a car and they were gonna drive it to Washington, D.C., and they were gonna give it to the president. And we thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. But we went home and we started thinking about it, and we realized, canoes are meant to be paddled. So maybe we should paddle this canoe to Washington, D.C. instead. And so we talked to the handful of folks in Ely that were just starting this effort that would become the campaign to save the Boundary Waters. And we pitched our idea, and they went for it. And so we started planning, and we would spend 100 days paddling from Ely, from the Boundary Waters, from the mine site to Washington, D.C. And we named the canoe after this man. You probably recognize him, Sigurd Olsen, because Sigurd Olsen was one of the conservation pioneers that first helped protect the Boundary Waters, and also because people were adding their signature to it. So we took off in the fall of 2014. This is just downstream from where the Twin Metals mine site is, where the water flows from Birch Lake towards White Iron Lake. And we would paddle and portage all the way to DC. And all along the way, we gave presentations and we gathered thousands of signatures on the canoe. And by the time we were portaging towards the White House, we were pretty excited because we thought, great, the Boundary Waters is going to be protected. This copper mine, we're going to stop it. But what we quickly learned was that conservation battles like this often take a very long time. A decade is not uncommon. And shortly before we reached Washington, D.C. And met with elected officials and were sharing our story, we were contacted by a young man named Joseph Goldstein. He's here in the light blue sweatshirt with the long hair. And he's here with his family, his little brothers, and he's been going to the Boundary Waters every year since he was 5 years old. And at the time, he was 13. And Joseph had just been diagnosed with leukemia, and he was getting chemotherapy treatment in the hospital for the first time. And someone from the Make-A-Wish Foundation came and asked him what his wish was. And after thinking about it for a long time, he decided he didn't want a pony or a sports car or a trip to Disney World. He wanted to save the Boundary Waters. That was his wish. And so he contacted us because he'd been following our journey and asked if we could help him. And we couldn't really turn that down. And Joseph, I'm thankful to say, is now cancer-free. And ever since that point, over the last 6 years, he has been a constant advocate for the Boundary Waters. Here he is during a break for his chemotherapy meeting with Sally Jewell, the Secretary of the Interior. I mean, he even got to meet Smokey the Bear. So he still is working tirelessly to protect the Boundary Waters. And this, selfless act from this young kid who was struggling with cancer really inspired us to want to do more. and played a big role in why we decided to spend a whole year out in the wilderness, because we felt like we had to do more because the Boundary Waters is such a special place. This is what the Boundary Waters looks like from the air. You know, it's half land, half water. The Boundary Waters is 1,000,000+ acres, and it's part of the Superior National Forest, which is 3 million acres. And that 3 million acres represents about 2% of our national forest system, but it contains 20% of all the fresh water in all of our national forests. And that water is so clean, you can just dip your cup in the lake and drink it right out of the lakes. And so, you know, we're not lawyers, we don't have a lot of money, but we can paddle a canoe. And so we decided that the best thing that we could do to help protect this national treasure was to spend a whole year out there and try and help people across the country, whether they'd visited the Boundary Waters 100 times or they had never heard of the Boundary Waters before. It doesn't matter. It belongs to all of us, and it's up to all of us to protect it. So we want to play this short film called Bear Witness. It's about 12 minutes long. And then afterwards, we'll open it up to questions, and we'd love to answer as many questions as you can send at us.
And you know, it's fine if you want to get a jump on things, type questions into the Q&A during the film. Happy to take a look at them while the film is playing.
Enjoy.
Today, Northland explorers Dave and Amy Freeman set out on a year-long voyage through the Boundary Waters canoe area.
The couple embarked on this journey to raise awareness about what they believe would be the environmental dangers of copper-nickel mining in the area.
Their ultimate goal is to help educate others about the sulfide-ore copper mining that's planned in the Boundary Waters area.
Summer is ending. Light glistens on the frost coating the marsh grasses. Our time here begins.
Wilderness. It's a big word with a long history. As individuals, we've struggled against it.
We tamed it, cut it, confined it to the periphery, to the boundaries of our civilization.
As a society, it fed us, all of us. And then we realized that what remained contained a different value.
If you have been here, you understand. The days are getting shorter. With it, the cold arrives.
This morning, ice rimmed the shore on the bay of our campsite. The lake steamed as it cooled in the 8-degree morning air. Gathering firewood becomes part of our daily routine. Life is not easy in the wilderness. We are kept busy from dawn to dusk, but our pace slows.
And we tune into the details. We sit at the water's edge, listening for the wolves. We tilt our heads back and howl. But they never howl back. Sled dogs are like people. They have their own unique personalities. Acorn is clearly the boss of our little pack. She is the mother of Tina and Tank.
She's 12 years old, but you never know it when you watch her run. Tina's really feisty, and she loves food. She starts howling and barking as soon as she hears the crinkle of the dog food bag.
Tank is a workhorse. He's twice the size of the girls.
He really shines when we get to steep hills or deep snow. The mercury hovered at minus 24 degrees Fahrenheit this morning when I stepped out of the tent. The ice was slow to form this year. The temperature is warmer than normal. Not today.
The blanket of snow lies unbroken, except for a few sinewy lines of tracks left by wolves and fox. Tina, Tank, and Acorn leaned into their harnesses. We glided silently across the white wilderness.
We near the wilderness boundary. Snow-covered rooftops dot the distant shore. After nearly 100 days in the wilderness, we talked about how we had no desire to walk up to one of those houses. This is where we belong.
There's no other place like it on Earth.
The lakes are perfect for traveling. I wish spring could last forever in the Boundary Waters.
We must drag the boat, moving across the ice as it melts. The days of paddling are right around the corner, but for now we must tread lightly. An unexpected swim could be catastrophic. We are never completely sure of our footing. There's a certain joy in that. We spin and laugh on the slippery surface as the sun sets. It's a perfect moment.
Shelter, warmth, food, companionship. These are all the things that we are searching for.
Wilderness makes these simple truths evident. There is wisdom in these waters.
We wrote a song with them about their mission and their expedition, and we finished it at the campfire on Snipe Lake in the Boundary Waters.
Wow.
It was really cool.
Amazing.
Yeah,
So they're spending a year in the Boundary Waters to bring attention to clean water issues.
and wrote a really cool song.
Standing proudly, we must speak loudly for this place, this quiet place.
The ice is gone. We travel by canoe and life is easy. Most of our tasks melted away with the end of spring. At times, the lake's smooth surface acts like a mirror, and it's hard to tell where the lake ends and the sky begins. In moments like this, it is clear. These wild places, these forests, these waters, they are our past and our present.
We see ourselves, what matters.
For they are a mirror. One that strips away clutter and reveals life's essence. Stillness, simplicity, friendship, love.
Time for a swim.
We have a habit of trampling these quiet things.
Silence, water, wilderness. I don't want to calculate or quantify them. Assigning a value seems a disservice. But they are too precious to risk.
This place, this water, belongs to all of us, and yet it belongs to none of us. These waters, this idea, it's bigger than any individual, ownership, right, or claim.
It's up to us to bear witness, so that others too can listen.
It is up to us to speak loudly for this quiet place. Sincerely,
Dave and Amy Freeman.
So after we spent a year out there, we spent the next year writing a book. So if you'd like to hear more stories, we hope that you'll check out our book. It's called A Year in the Wilderness. It has over 100 full color photos. And it's, you know, it's a great thing if you know someone that maybe likes wilderness, maybe they haven't been to the Boundary Waters before, it can be a great way to introduce people to the wilderness and help them understand how special it is. So if you haven't picked up a copy, hope you'll check it out. And we also just want to take a moment to thank Save the Boundary Waters. Save the Boundary Waters is the nonprofit organization that we've been partnering with for the last 7 years to try and protect the Boundary Waters from sulfide-ore copper mining. And you know, when we started talking to them in 2013 and signed that canoe at Sustainable Ely, it was really just a handful of local people that were coming together to try and stop this mine. It was in its infancy, but now the campaign to save the Boundary Waters and its partner organizations represent over 18 million people. All across the country and around the world. Amy is currently working with their business coalition. How many businesses now?
Over 300, like 300 27 at my last count. So yeah, that's been really fun working to add businesses. So if you happen to know of any businesses, or maybe you're a business owner, please sign up. The website is bwcabusiness.org. Happy to add more businesses.
Yeah, from Midwest Mountaineering, regional businesses like Midwest Mountaineering, to national brands like Patagonia, to small businesses here in Ely and Grand Marais and in northeastern Minnesota, faith-based organizations. There's a Gophers for the Boundary Waters, which is from kids or people at the University of Minnesota. There's Kids for the Boundary Waters, which is specific for youth, high school and college age folks that are advocating to protect the boundary waters. There's Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters, Veterans for the Boundary Waters, all these people coming together to help protect this special place. But all of this takes a lot of resources, and we hope that you'll support Save the Boundary Waters. You can learn more at savetheboundarywaters.org. Next week is Give to the Max, and they're already collecting donations. They're hoping to raise $150,000 between now and next Thursday. So please consider making a donation if you can. We would love to. We've seen a bunch of great questions that have come in, so we'll do our best to try and answer as many as we can. One that I'm just going to answer right away, just because it was related to the film. Someone asked if we had a film crew, and we did. So part of the footage was stuff that Amy and I filmed on our own, and then we had 2 videographers that came in 3 times for about 5 days each time, and they took their footage and our footage and combined it, and it was the film was made possible by a grant that Save the Boundary Waters got from Patagonia, the clothing company. So it was really a team effort, and it's available online. You can find it on YouTube or Vimeo or on the Save the Boundary Waters website. So please share the film with your friends and help us spread the word.
Yeah, and just another shout out. The film was edited by Fitz Cahal with duct tape and beer. So it was pretty cool to work with those guys on the film. All right, let's get to some more questions here. Here's one about winter. Interested in our impressions of so many dark hours. Did it dampen our spirits? What changes did you see in yourselves through the cold and darkness?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the winter in many ways was the hardest time, just because we had to spend so much time gathering firewood, and just staying warm is harder, right? And we spent more time in the tent. We didn't move as much. Someone else asked about how many lakes did we visit. So we visited 501 different named bodies of water. We set this arbitrary goal to visit 500 bodies of water, and towards the end we were sort of like, oh, we better find a couple more here. We're running out of time. So we just barely made it. But in the winter, we camped in about 100 different campsites over the course of the year. So we were constantly moving around, and in the winter, we didn't move as much as in the summer. While in the summer, we were moving every few days. In the winter, sometimes we would spend up to a week in one location before moving on to the next. And we'd just go out for day trips in the meantime. So the winter definitely caused us to sort of travel a little more slowly. And we spent more time just, trying to stay warm, cutting firewood and, eating lots of food and just trying to take care of ourselves.
Well, and with spending so much more time in the tent, it was really during the winter that the idea to write a book about the experience began to take hold. Like, I had been doing a lot of journaling, and of course we were doing these constant updates for our website and for like blog posts for Save the Boundary Waters, working on a podcast. So we felt like we had all this content, and So I think it was kind of neat that all that time in the tent and the darkness inspired us to get creative and, you know, really work on documenting even more and seeking out a way to write a book.
Yeah, and the tent we were using was made by a company called Seek Outside. It's a teepee tent. So we had a collapsible titanium wood stove inside it, so we could heat the tent and keep it warm. And so that helped, you know, with journaling and communication. I think also sort of just gave us the comfort we needed to start thinking, sort of like, oh yeah, we could turn this into a book, and that could be another way to get the word out.
Okay, this one's about food. Did you eat fish for 366 days? How did you survive? Well, yeah, we would probably not do very well on the show alone. We were not like living off the land. We did certainly do some fishing, which was awesome and very tasty at times. We also gathered blueberries in the summertime, and one really special thing was during the fall harvesting wild rice. But for the most part, we were eating food that was actually brought to us. It was pretty amazing. Volunteers actually paddled in to deliver resupplies of food to us throughout the year. So I shouldn't just say paddled, paddled and skied and snowshoed and dog sledded. So how many volunteers was it, Dave?
Over 300. Yeah, we were pretty blown away. We figured we could at least get, you know, a few of our local friends or something to come out if we needed, but in reality, it was a flood of volunteers. It was really, really cool. That was one of the neatest parts. And a man named Levi, who works for Save the Boundary Waters, based here in Ely, part of his job during the year was to be our expedition coordinator, and so he coordinated all the volunteers, and he would buy the food that we basically send him a grocery list, and he would package up the food and get it ready for the volunteers to bring in.
Okay, wintering, is your gear state of the art or timeless?
You know,
I kind of covered that.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, you know, it's like we were wearing mucklucks, and we used toboggans, which are a fairly traditional form of travel, but our toboggans were made out of plastic rather than, you know, birch or something like that. So it was a little bit of a mixture.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. There was one I wanted to be sure to get to about the highs and lows of solitude. I'm just kind of in general curious about highs and lows, which it does relate to that question about all that time in the dark hours of the winter. But I think there is a lot to that. You know, we did have visitors with, you know, volunteers bringing us food and whatnot about every 2 weeks, but then it was the shoulder seasons when we had these longer periods of time without seeing anybody else. And I think that did cause us to slow down and really pay attention to kind of all the details around us. You know, it could be really interesting to just stay in our campsite and sort of check on what's going on with the local wildlife and really get to know a place in detail. So in that regard, I guess I didn't experience that many lows. I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I think the highs, you know, when you're out in the wilderness, I find it's like the highs are higher and the lows are lower, maybe, you know, like it's, I mean, for the most part, I think I have a lot more highs than lows out in the wilderness, because I think it's just physically and mentally, emotionally, it's just very beneficial to be outside and be active like that. But I do think that it sort of, it heightens your senses in all ways. And so I think there is sort of a heightened emotional state that you find out there, which is one of the things that really draws us to the wilderness, I think. Lots of good questions. I don't know what to.
So there's one, like, not wanting to really get into the politics of it, but asking, how does one best support getting the science to speak, like to carry the day with the mining question? And I think, so the education of about how this type of mining is so different from the traditional, like, iron ore and taconite mining that we have in the region. We're not anti-mining, we're anti-copper mining on the doorstep of the Boundary Waters, within the watershed of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And so I think really being able to explain to people the difference is very, very helpful. The threat of the pollution from the sulfide-ore copper mining, and the campaign to save the Boundary Waters has done a good job of laying out all the science. So if you go to their website, I was trying to type it in earlier into the chat. Sorry, I can't type it for you, but savetheboundarywaters.org. They have all sorts of good fact sheets on this. If there's something, some aspect of it you want to look up to be able to share with people, or just sharing, an entire PDF, that can be pretty helpful.
Yeah, I think, there's so many ways that we can help, like talking to our friends and neighbors, people in our communities is really important. Bringing people to the Boundary Waters and helping them experience it for themselves, I think is critical. Talking to, calling or emailing our legislators, elected officials, decision makers is important. And also, supporting organizations like Save the Boundary Waters that are, really boots on the ground, working on this, filing lawsuits, working on with folks to really protect the Boundary Waters long term. So I think that all those are things that you can do. Becky Rahm from Save the Boundary Waters is doing a presentation in a few days. And she knows more about this than anybody. And her presentation, I'm really looking forward to it because she is going to really lay everything out and explain what's going on, and just really help provide people with a roadmap for where this is going and how people can get involved. So I'd encourage you to check out her presentation in a few days.
Yeah, I have some details about that actually. So tune in the same place, Outdoor Adventure Expo on Wednesday, November 18th. And she's in the same time slot as us. So 7:45 next Wednesday. And so Becky Rahm, who's the national chair of the campaign to save the Boundary Waters, and Dan Cannonen, the political and policy consultant, will address like the implications of kind of, how things are changing as a result of the recent election. So I think that will be super interesting to tune into and be able to ask them questions.
Yeah, and someone just sort of along that vein, someone asked about the current status of the mine. So the mine, the Twin Metals mine has not been built yet. They're sort of trying to build it, but there are a bunch of lawsuits. They have sort of finalized a mine plan, but it hasn't been approved yet. So it's still a long ways from building the mine, and so there's still a lot that we can do to stop it from happening. But the time is now, like we sort of only have one chance. So the next year is going to be, we've been saying this for a long time, but the next year is going to be really important. and Becky will talk more about that in her presentation as well. But you know, it's a long fight, and it's one that we're going to win. But we just have to keep working on it. And they haven't built the mine yet, but they're slowly sort of trying to move that way. Someone wrote a nice message. I'm glad that you read our book and you couldn't put it down and are enjoying it. What was the high point of your trip? That's really hard to pick one. I think the spring, you know, the spring and the fall were really cool as the lakes were freezing like this time of year, and as the ice was melting and going away, because we'd never really been out in the wilderness right at those moments. And especially in the spring, it was really cool because it was like overnight, everything just popped. Like, you know, all of a sudden we hadn't heard any songbirds in 6 months, you know, and then one morning it's like the songbirds were singing, and, you know, there were blue spotted salamanders climbing, you know, out of the duff when there was still, you know, 10 inches of ice on the lake, but a south facing slope, all the snow was gone. The earth is heating up, and they're crawling around getting ready to breed. So all the life just sort of came back at once as the season was changing, and, you know, dragging the canoe across the ice and then figuring out how to hop in it and paddle through the open water and then get back out. All that was really challenging and new. And so I think that was really a highlight.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question about how we handled moisture in our gear in the winter, with so many sustained days in the field. That is a good question. And honestly, the secret is having a hot tent. So with the teepee tent, we had a wood stove in it. And so we were burning wood and able to like warm up the space around us and dry out any gear that we had gotten wet during the day. That's one of the beauties of camping in the boreal forest, like having plentiful, like dead down firewood that we could harvest fairly easily and be able to dry our stuff out.
Yeah, there's a huge temperature gradient. So near the top of the tent, it could be 85 degrees. So we would hang, you know, mittens or socks or things we needed to dry up high. And even if it was only 40 degrees or 50 degrees down where we were sitting near the floor, up above our heads, it would be quite warm. And so things actually dry fairly fast.
Here's a question about what kind of communication we had in order to like coordinate with the volunteers in case we had an emergency. And actually, I'm going to put a disclaimer in there because we had above and beyond just emergency communication, because we were like broadcasting the year. You know, we were constantly sharing photos and blog posts and, you know, all these updates and a podcast. So we had a satellite terminal out there with us. So that enabled us to send, like, you know, kind of small photos and text. And whenever volunteers came in, that's when we were sending out these like SD cards of videos and, you know, like backing up kind of the higher resolution photos, and also information for the podcast that we were doing with WTIP, the radio station in Grand Marais. But that's kind of above and beyond, right? So we also had what's called an Inreach device. So initially, like at the time, it was Delorum made this Inreach. Now it's owned by Garmin. So a Garmin Inreach is what we could use to send quick little messages if we had to communicate something fairly quickly, just a short little message, like sending a text. All right. How about the Sled Dogs?
Oh, yeah. So Amy and I have been working with Sled Dogs for a long time. For me, since 1999. Amy, what, 2006, something like that. So we've worked with Sled Dogs for a long time, mostly through Wintergreen Dog Sled Lodge, which is right outside of Ely on White Iron Lake. Dogsledding.com if you want to come dog sledding. But so we've worked with dogs for a long time, but for a year in the wilderness, we weren't sure, we couldn't have our own dogs because we were going to be out there and we only needed them for the winter. So we talked to a local musher named Frank Moe. He and Sherry, his wife, live in Hovland. And Frank is a musher, and he did a project called Sled Dogs to St. Paul, where he dog sledded from Grand Marais to the state capitol to work to stop sulfide-ore copper mining in Minnesota. And we asked him if he knew of anybody that might have any dogs we could borrow. And a couple days later, he said, well, how about these dogs, these 3 dogs, and his own dogs. And so he let us borrow Acorn, who was his all-time favorite lead dog, but she was getting a little bit little older, and but she'd been his lead dog for all the John Bear Grease dog sled races he'd done, and dozens of other dog sled races. And then Tina and Tank, who were Acorn's son and daughter, 2 years younger than her. And so it was sort of like a little family. And so right after the lakes froze, Frank came in with a dog team, and he dropped off Tina, Tank, and Acorn, and they would spend the winter with us. We just had them. We had 2 toboggans and the 3 dogs, so they would pull the toboggans. And we decided we didn't want to have a full dog team because the dogs eat about 2 pounds of food per dog per day. So if we had a whole team of them, it would just be a huge amount of food. And the only way we could get resupplied basically was going to be by dog team, because there was going to be so much weight to haul. And we just felt it was just a lot of stuff, and we thought it's fun to travel with a smaller team. And so we chose the toboggan, so we would ski along and the dogs would pull the stuff. And at the end of the winter, we were so attached to them, we asked if we could keep Tank. And so Tank stayed with us for the spring and summer and fall. So he was with us for like 9 months, while the other dogs were there just for, I guess, from around the 1st of January through the beginning of April, I guess. So yeah, they're great dogs, and we miss them a lot. They were definitely wonderful companions.
Oh man, there are a lot of questions coming in.
Okay.
So what should we? Well, one was, how did you charge stuff?
Oh yeah, so we had several sort of portable solar panels made by a company called Goal Zero, and so we would charge up and also Goal Zero battery packs. So we would charge the battery packs with the solar panels, either at a campsite or laid out on top of our canoe or on top of the toboggan, and then we would use those battery packs to recharge cameras or iPad or whatever it was that we needed to charge.
Here's one about gear. One piece of gear you brought in and then sent back out on a resupply, or one piece of gear you didn't originally bring but realized that we wanted.
That's a good question. So part of, we actually sent stuff in and out a lot, because just like food. So, once the lakes froze, some volunteers met us near the edge of the wilderness, and they hauled the canoe out, along with our paddles and life jackets and all that kind of stuff. our toboggans and winter stuff was hauled in. So things were constantly sort of going back and forth as the seasons changed. So we didn't have to haul everything with us all the time.
And if we realized we needed something, we'd send Levi a text on the Inreach.
Yeah.
So that we could get whatever it was, in 2 weeks.
Yeah, at our next resupply. I would say one thing that we had that we were like, wow, this is awesome, that we had never had before was a Helinox chair, like those like portable chairs that you have sort of tent poles that you can make a little chair. They only weigh like a pound. And that is something that it's like, I never want to go on a camping trip again without one of those. And I'm trying to think what else. We have a saw made by a company called Silky. That's called the Katana Boy. It's like this huge folding saw that's almost like a chainsaw. It is absolutely amazing. And the blade is like 2 feet long. And that's like in the winter when you have to process a lot of firewood. That was another thing that was like never gonna give that up. That's an awesome tool.
And just to be clear, the power is your arm.
It is your arms.
It's not a chainsaw.
It's not a chainsaw. That would be illegal, but it's like it cuts wood almost as fast as a chainsaw. Not quite, but it's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if there was anything that we had with us that we just decided, we don't really need this.
I'm sure there was, but I just don't remember.
Right.
Maybe it'll come to us. Someone asked about close calls, thin ice, storms, bears. So I fell through the ice as we were waiting for the ice to freeze, like right before Christmas. And that's the only time I've ever fallen through the ice, like out in the middle of the lake where the water is super deep. So that was quite scary. But luckily I caught myself on the ice and I only went in through up to my waist. And then we were in a huge like wind lightning storm in July, which was super scary. Worst storm we've ever been in all of our journeys. Super scary. We had a bunch of trees come down in our campsite. And then Harry Smith from the Today Show came in the next day. So it was like almost impossible for him to get in because like docks and motorboats were blown all over the place. And
just the roads.
And the roads were covered in trees and whatnot. So it was a crazy time in general, but
he made it.
He did make it. Yeah. But those were sort of the two probably really scary moments, but most of the time it wasn't scary.
Oh, did we tune into the Polka Saturday mornings on End of the Road Radio? We actually did. That reminds me of another piece of equipment that I honestly thought, oh, this is silly. Why would we bring this? But it was actually really handy and we enjoyed having it. It was this teeny tiny radio. I mean, I kid you not, it's like this big in a cube. That Dave had guided a canoe trip during the previous summer, and one of the participants had brought this in, and they were like, "Oh, you'll need a radio while you're out there," and so we could like tune in to the local radio stations.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and she actually just wrote a bestseller romance novel.
The woman who gave you the radio. That was Abby.
Yeah. What's her book?
She's written 2 so far, but the one that references the Boundary Waters, the Happy Ever After playlist.
Yeah, it's like based in the Boundary Waters.
By Abby Jimenez.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, favorite meals. Over the years, our meal plan has gotten simpler and simpler and simpler. So by the time we spent a year in the wilderness, we basically had like 2 dinners and like 2 breakfasts. We basically eat sort of like a rice and lentil type thing for dinner and a spaghetti based meal for dinner, and then like oatmeal or granola for breakfast. Sometimes pancakes as a really big treat. I think the the best meal of the whole year was a local woman. She dehydrated a meal from Insula, which is a restaurant in Ely that's Amy's favorite. It's short ribs. And she dehydrated the whole meal and then sent it in with directions for how to rehydrate it. And we were like, this is absolutely amazing. What is this? And then, later on, she told us, oh yeah, I got this meal at Insula and dehydrated it for you. So
It was so good.
oh, it was amazing.
Most surprising, unexpected animal or bird that we saw on our trip. Well, I can think of just, a really exciting animal encounter. I mean, we were hoping to see these animals because we know they're out there in relative abundance. Wolves. We had a few instances of seeing wolves, but the most memorable for me was during that in-between time as the ice was forming, and we pretty much knew there weren't any other people out in the wilderness area at that point. We had gotten our kind of lawn resupplied to see us through the ice forming, and we had a pack of wolves actually run through our campsite in the evening, so it was dark out in the tent preparing dinner, and we could just at first hear, like a twig snap and their footsteps, but then we knew it was wolves because we could hear these like kind of lower level vocalizations, like they were talking amongst each other, like a growl here, a little like kind of whimper there. It was really amazing. And then after they had like kind of crossed through our campsite, we heard them howl. I think they got to a safe distance, and I don't know what they were communicating, just like, hey, we weren't expecting it, but there are people out here.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Oh yeah, tell us about coming out. So tell us about day 366 coming out of the wild. Someone earlier asked, this was actually the very beginning, asked, is there a second year? And so I sort of answered both of these at the same time. I think when we entered the wilderness, we were a little bit like, what if all of a sudden we're like 213 days before we can leave the wilderness, and actually as the time to exit the wilderness drew closer in the last month, certainly in the last few days, we were very anxious about leaving. We did not want to leave. We would have been happy to stay. And honestly, if we felt like spending another year on the Boundary Waters would help protect the Boundary Waters, if it would help really raise the conversation, if that was the thing that would help, we would certainly do it again in a heartbeat. It was an amazing year. And when we paddled out, there were like 200 people that met us in pontoon boats and canoes and kayaks and paddle boards, and there were film crew, like TV crews there, and so it was quite overwhelming. It was hard to sleep because we couldn't hear the outside world. So we couldn't hear the wind blowing through the trees. We couldn't hear the waves lapping on shore. It took us several weeks, I think, before we really could sleep soundly. We were on an airplane 3 days after we came out, flying to Washington, D.C., and then we spent a week in D.C., for meeting with elected officials. So it was hard. I mean, it felt like we were on another planet because we had just been plucked out of the wilderness. So it was a hard transition, but I think one thing that we've learned is that humans are amazingly adaptable. So we got, you get used to it pretty quickly.
It's true. Oh, this is another type of transition. How did you handle the water ice transition? So those shoulder seasons, like wondering about the equipment, having the canoe and the toboggan, and actually we did have these sort of bizarre overlaps where we like got winter equipment, but there was still some open water and we were paddling our canoe. So the cool thing about a toboggan, the one we used, or two we used, were made by Black River Sleds. And so you can roll them up. So like at some point we had our toboggans like rolled and in the canoe. And then it wasn't until the ice was really solid and we spent some time like dragging our canoe around on the ice that we were able to send it out. And kind of the same thing in reverse really was like having this overlap. So I remember as we were waiting for the lakes to open up, having the toboggans, but also having our skis. And then once we were paddling, we were trying to figure out how we paddle in portage with these bizarre loads of the toboggans and the skis. Yeah, it was a little awkward, but it all worked out. Just some extra trips across the portages.
Yeah, and luckily we didn't have, for the most part, as soon as conditions allowed us to get rid of, skis or whatever, or the canoe in the winter, as soon as we didn't need the canoe anymore, as soon as possible we got rid of it, and then as soon as we could get rid of the skis and stuff in the spring, we did. So we didn't have to carry them around for that long when they weren't usable. And also during the spring and the fall, we didn't travel as much. There were days when we literally couldn't really travel because the water was sort of like too frozen to paddle through, but not thick enough to walk on. And so we did have times where we literally were just like waiting because we couldn't leave the campsite or we couldn't leave the lake we were on just because the conditions didn't allow it. What type of skis? So we were using like a backcountry full metal edge ski for the most part. And we had 3-pin bindings and Alpina Alaskan, like big heavy duty boots that were nice and warm. Yeah, I think if we did it again, we probably would go with the NNNBC binding rather than the 3-pin, just because we've had some problems with the soles of the 3-pin boots breaking. But yeah, it worked out.
All right. Well, time-wise and question-wise, I think we're pretty well at the end. So I just want to give you a few reminders. So come back again. Well, come back for all the awesome presentations. It's so cool to go through the list to see who's presenting at the expo here. So really exciting to check that out. But my main plug is for the Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters update with Becky Rahm, and that's November 18th, Wednesday, 7:45. And the next day, Thursday, that's actually Give to the Max Day. So, but you can kind of plan out, like you can make your donation ahead of time, like any time now, really, if you're up for doing that, that would be awesome. And really a big thank you to Midwest Mountaineering. We always love the outdoor adventure expos, and we're kind of wondering how it would work out this year, and we're so glad that you guys went virtual. So happy to participate. Thank you for all your great questions this evening.
Yeah, this was super fun. Hope you learned a lot. And yeah, we'll look forward to the next expo so we can do this again. Bye.